Yeah, let's kick this off then. Welcome everyone to the meeting. We have some new faces here. We have a couple people that are just kind of observing for future guest speaker roles. We have quite a few mentees and mentors, and a lot of new mentors in the program recently. But I'd like to personally welcome Robert Arco and thank him for taking time out of his busy schedule over at Microsoft. So, just a little background on Robert. He's been in the industry for over 40 years, but BC specifically for about 30, um, working in major companies such as Microsoft, KeyBank, BNP, T-Mobile. So when you look at it, he's got that very broad spectrum of different disciplines, including Microsoft. So there's different industries, wealth of knowledge, and he brings this unique aspect to his BC that is worth listening to indeed. So right now he is the program owner for the BC program, if I'm correct, of
Yep.
Microsoft, and
Or
he
Azure
works.
Cloud Services.
So he works
What
with
you know is
Azure,
Azure worldwide.
definitely, and so he's the program owner for this. But the program is massive, and he'll go into that in depth with his. But I would like to go ahead and pass off the floor to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. I'm going to correct you on some years here. I've got 25 years experience in the BCM practice. I was a programmer for almost 20 years before that. I've been 12 years at Microsoft managing worldwide cloud business continuity management. And as you pointed out, I've served across a variety of verticals: banking, brokerage, insurance, telecom, and of course, technology services. And you see some of the companies I've worked for, which have really given me a good cross view of what are the requirements and needs that differ in those things. Banks are highly regulated, and they have their own set of deliverables they need in the BCM space. Insurance is another one. Insurance tends to be not as real time as banking, obviously. T-Mobile gave me a lot of insights into the telecom industry, and I actually got a really good education on supply chain. Because you think of T-Mobile and the connectivity of phones, but you don't necessarily think of, wow, one of the major parts of their business is delivering phones and repairing phones and taking in exchanges and things like that. And that all uh, revolves around supply chain. So I became supply chain certified. So every one of these roles has added to my career and knowledge. And then, of course, Microsoft. And this was a really good fit for me because I have the in-depth understanding of business continuity programs, but at the same time able to absorb uh, technology concepts. Okay. So, I started in the bad old days with mainframes, backup tapes. If we were going to test a disaster, we called Iron Mountain, which is where you stored your backup that may have been 24 hours or longer. And they'd meet us somewhere and we'd spin up the systems. And that was the old days, especially in the KeyBank days. Um, then we moved to, region pairs and things like that. But again, single industry things. When I say single industry, if you were a bank, you had your primary and secondary data center. And you had your mainframes and everything. And then you moved to servers and things. But again, it was an individual. Cloud was a paradigm shift. Cloud allowed companies to say, I don't need my own IT in the sense of infrastructure, data centers, things like that. I can do the same kind of work, but Microsoft will host it for me. So the major shift there, though, was instead of an individual service company um, being responsible and having impact and saying, well, this individual bank is having problems, but it doesn't affect everything else. Once everything moved to the clouds, now you've put all your eggs in one basket. And we have to be very resilient in the clouds because if a region, as we call them, goes down, you could affect banking, healthcare, 911, emergency services, governments. You could literally take down a country. Okay. So that was the major paradigm shift. So I'm going to go into this. Uh, did I skip one? Yeah. Becoming a BCM, business continuity management practitioner. So you want a career. Okay. The career role of a practitioner is definitely in high demand by a variety of commercial businesses and government entities across the globe. In every vertical, such as banking, brokerage, healthcare, manufacturing, telecom, emergency services, the need for risk identification and proactive mitigation is integral in preserving business. I've mentioned a whole bunch of verticals there, but just use your mind to say, well, if I'm a manufacturing company and I depend on systems and locations to do my work, if those locations are impacted or the services are impacted, my business stops. And the customers I serve, in the manufacturing space, think supply chain. We're having problems with one of our locations. That's where supply chain gets impacted because the parts or the products that they may serve don't get delivered. And that's more of a long chain versus a bank that customers can't withdraw deposit money. That's bad. Brokerage, I can't close my positions at the end of the day in a market. That's very bad. So what does a practitioner do? Methodically, the practitioner learns the business they're working in, they support. And primarily, they learn what are the key elements that matter most to the business or entity. Okay. Every business has different priorities. And the business or commercial space you're in has to let you know what those priorities are. So these could be business processes, help desk, parts building, customer service. Those are business processes, people doing the work. Or their critical things could be technology services, applications that run the business, or delivery to end users. So let's use the telecom, T-Mobile thing. Yes, it's very important they have help desk. It's very important that they have supply chain. But their bread and butter, the thing that's going to create the most impact, and they would say is the most important to you, is the ability to support telecom, that people can make calls, they can send text and things like that. So that's their high impact identification. So once understood, the role of the practitioner is to look at these key elements with a risk assessment lens, determining how critical it is to the business and what, if any, plans are in place to ensure that there's mitigation and prevent impacts or mitigate if they occur. Because there's really two legs to this. The first is, what can I proactively put in place to mitigate impacts? But then there's the reactive that says, do I have processes and procedures in place that say, if proactively I have not been able to mitigate this, what do I do to handle incidents, incident response, contacts, things like that? So how does a practitioner work? Uh, you may work as a sole contributor assigned a body of work, or as part of a team of compliance practitioners. In all cases, the entity you support defines the scope and breadth of the role. I can't say to you that when you go here, this is exactly what your role will be. It really depends what company you're working for and what's their current scope. So some BCM elements. BCM is an umbrella term, and that may consist of a variety of things depending on what organization you support. So by the nature of its definition, business continuity management can include a variety of scoped elements that need to be addressed, but it's not limited to. It really depends on how that place runs their program, if they even have a program. So BC, we know business continuity that addresses the continuance of business process, people, okay? Where you work, where you do, if you're a help desk, if you're a finance person, you're a business process. You may be the person who runs accounts payable. Okay, that's a business process. You use technology to do your job. I get on and do spreadsheets and things, or I sign into some program, but you are delivering a business process. And if you stop, accounts payable stops. DR, which is the planning for technology recovery in the face of catastrophic loss. Um, and that differs from the next one. DR, when we think of DR, we think about we've lost a data center, okay? And we need to recover somewhere remote because you have to look at blast radius. So I'm going to go to the next one, high availability. And that addresses localized technology incidents that need to be mitigated. Short amount of time in region, it doesn't require going somewhere else. So what's some examples? Um, you lose utility power. Okay. Uh, Uninterrupted power supplies kick in and kick off the generators. So you're still running in the same location. It has not been a catastrophic loss. So you're not doing DR. You have practices in place for high availability. You may have replicated storage in the local region. You may have dual cording to racks and clusters that if one cord goes bad, the other one's still powering it. So those are high availability things. Disaster recovery in your space is a meteor hit the data center. Or it had a major fire. It's not coming back or not coming back anytime soon. And some of those things could be short-lived. They could be a week or two, but businesses can't be down a week or two. So that's where DR comes in. And in my practice, what we define DR, and this is by controls too from many auditing bodies, is your primary and secondary are sufficiently distanced to not be impacted by the same event. Okay. There's a myth in the BCM practice. Oh, that's 200 kilometers. That's 200 miles. No, there is no control that actually names a distance that has to be supported. What it is sufficiently distanced to not be impacted by the same event. So, you know, 50 miles might be enough if it's not in the same kind of risk zone. But if that whole 50-mile area, like the Puget Sound area, is in an earthquake zone, yeah, that's a little too close. If you're, on an island and top of the island, bottom of the island, and they're susceptible to tsunami, that's not sufficiently distanced. The other thing is sometimes in business continuity, they can incorporate in their program security. Now, security, I look at, and in Microsoft, we look at that as a separate space. It's not under the BCM umbrella. It is leveraged, but is not under my purview. But some programs do that, and life and safety might be under BCM. What are your practices for ensuring employee safety and procedures for EMT, fire department? Again, in Microsoft, that's a whole different thing. Our global security and facilities management handle those things. So you would never see in my program, oh, do you have documentation about fire department, police, EMT? Our data centers have that, but that's because they, again, are a facility. They're not a software service, they're a facility. So they would have to have those things. Where I work, if I was in Redmond, Washington, in the offices, I would be covered by global security and facilities that would say, okay, Robert, we got you covered. You fall over, and you hit 0 on the phones. We'll send somebody, we've automatically called 911. Has nothing to do with the BCM program. And again, facilities management may cover processes. So you could work in a place that BCM means all of those things. Or it can just be the traditional BC, DR, and high availability is also referenced as resiliency, resilient to failures that you have multiple instances of something. You're not doing DR because in many cases, DR in itself, the practice of it could be semi-catastrophic. You know, it's a lot of times it could be a one-way ticket. It could create other errors if not set up. So it's really not the thing you say, we just pull the trigger. Individual services may, but for a whole location, it's a big deal. Are we good so far? Okay. So, you know, I've mentioned this, but, you know, common taxonomy, BC, business continuity, DR, disaster recovery. So then going along with that, a BCP is a plan. It's a business continuity plan for resuming business processes. Hey, my facility, we evacuated because there was smoke in the building. What is your BC plan? My BC plan is I can work remotely. I can work from another location. I can work in a Starbucks. Or no, I need to have an on-site facility because what I do is secure or needs specialized equipment. So that plan may include proactively having locations that you can go to. The DR plan, again, that's recovery of technology services. You know, my finance app is very highly critical, and we have put in place high availability, but also DR that if it were to go down in a primary data center or region, it will fail over to an alternate place. More common taxonomy, RTO, recovery time objective. This is the goal for recovery of a process or technology. It doesn't matter which, but it says, how soon do I need this? Okay. When does this become screaming impact? Is it screaming impact at 30 minutes? Is it screaming impact at 4 hours? Is it screaming impact at 3 days? And that helps you define, it's one of the elements of your criticality. RPO, which is recovery point objective, only applies to technology. It's how much data loss is acceptable in a recovery scenario. We don't look at that in business processes because we're talking about humans. So unless you've been hit on the head and there may be some data loss there, it really only applies to uh, technology. And the reason we have this is, remember I mentioned before, blast radius and sufficiently distanced to not be impacted by the same event. Well, once you get past a certain distance, region to region, data center to data center, replication generally winds up being asynchronous, meaning it's not one for one because of latency, speed of light, physics. Okay, if you're within 90 kilometers, generally you can do synchronous replication. Okay, if you have data center A here and 10 miles away you have data center B, due to physics and the ability to replicate data is 0 RPO. There's no data loss. But once you get distanced, you start having to address that. So you might have 15 minutes data loss. You might have 30 minutes data loss. And it really depends on the size of the pipeline, the amount of data being pushed through that pipeline, and the distance. And it doesn't necessarily mean there's automatically data loss. If you're not super high transactional, chances are your data will always be in sync. But if you're doing, a couple thousand transactions a minute, because you're a bank or a brokerage, think about it, and you're distanced, yeah, there's going to be some data loss. Okay. More common taxonomy. RTC, RTA, RPC, RPA. So just like RTO and RPO, there are similar acronyms defining confirmation of recovery times and recovery points. So for example, we said RTO before. Well, if you test it and you say, well, this is actually how long it took me to do it, that's an RTC, recovery time confirmed. Some people use RTA, recovery time approved, but it is the proof of, can I meet my RTO? Hey, I had a 1 hour RTO for this service in a catastrophic loss. And in my testing, I was able to do it end to end in 30 minutes. Okay, you met it. Or I tested it and it took me 2 hours. You're not meeting your RTO. But you have to have that measurement. You can't just throw arbitrary numbers out there and say, oh, my RTO is 1 hour. Well, can you meet that? Well, we don't know. We haven't tested it. So it could be 10 minutes. It could be 20 hours. It is highly important that things are tested for real. Tabletops, when it comes to technology, are insufficient because it's at that point, it's a theory. I think it will work this way. But what you find out in real testing, and these can be done in test environments, is, oh, I didn't account for that dependency, or my steps didn't account for certain things. I would have had to do this, so it's taking longer. And that's your opportunity for improvement. And sorry, my slides don't have any cool graphics or anything like that. I had that and Daniel shot it down. No, I'm just kidding. I have those kinds of things, but this was more of a conversation kind of meeting. And, I'm going to certainly leave enough time for questions and stuff. SLA, these are generally contractual or mandated agreements regarding availability of services. They may or may not drive RTO, RPO. It depends. You can have an SLA for standard, in region kind of things and say, we will have a 99 point whatever, and you'll never suffer anything more in region than 15 minutes downtime, contractually or by agreement. But that kind of goes out the window with DR because that's a whole different scenario. In the case of SLA, you generally, meeting requirements where maybe a single or two services are impacted. When you're talking about DR, you're saying the whole boat is moving. So that is really different than saying, oh, well, I just had to tweak this little configuration here. No, you've got massive amount of services moving from A to B, and that's not going to necessarily meet a 15-minute SLA. And compliance versus certification controls. This is a big one, especially in my space. Everything in my program is part of the compliance program. All of our services are required to do BCDR. It's a compliance requirement in the company. Certification controls, though, are a little different in that they need to ensure they can meet controls from external auditing bodies. And that could be commercial, like ISO, or things like that, or government, like FedRAMP. And generally what we find in the controls is certification controls is they all state it their own way. They all mean the same things. Have you addressed risk? Have you assigned criticalities and, RTOs? Have you mapped your dependencies? Do you have sufficient workforce? Do you have plans, and have you tested those plans? Do you capture any issues? Okay, say it 7 different ways. It all nets to the same thing. And in my program, that's how I was able to build. It doesn't matter if you're in compliance scope or certification scope. Certification scope means that, for example, when a FedRAMP comes and audits us, there is a scope of services that they are going to look at or can look at. So if we have, I'm just going to make it up, if we have 2,000 Azure services, only 175 may be in FedRAMP scope. Okay, so that's the certification ones, and we have to pay attention to those. But the compliance scope is the 2,000 services. The way we've built our program is every one of the services could meet those certifications. And that allows us to simplify in a sense that if something suddenly becomes in scope for certification, it's not like, well, we do BCDR for this, but if it's a certification scope, we do additional, and there would be a delta. If you do it all to meet certification controls, you never have that problem. Getting there. So for people who are new here, hey, where do I start? I've just been thrown into the lion's den. So where you start is based on one of these factors. The program already exists, and I'm joining to add value. I'm going to be joining a team. It already exists. Even if you're a sole contributor, it already exists. Take this over. Here's the documentation. Or the program needs to be developed from scratch. I don't have one. I need one. Help me design one. So in the former case, you'll be expected to learn the business and the BCM processes that support an existing program. How are you mapping things? What are your standards? What's your policy? What are the critical items? So that can include learning the scope, what it covers, as in slide 4. Is security part of that? Is life and safety part of that? Is facilities? Or is it strictly technology focused and it's DR and maybe business process? Learning what are the priorities? Learning the tools, the documentation, and standards they use to drive the program. This is the easier path of joining a company and becoming a BCM practitioner. Starting from scratch is obviously more difficult, but some common elements to consider. What are the primary goals and scope the organization wishes to address? What kind of support do they have in place for your mission? And those two kind of go hand in hand. The leadership buy-in or needs to be addressed. The place when you're going from scratch needs to tell you what's important to them. Because if you just go to a whole bunch of individual contributors, everything you do is important. But there really needs to be that top-down view that says, okay, here's our prioritization, and that prioritization may break down into other elements, but the macro elements in terms of what's important to them. So for example, you'll have finance, you could have HR, you could have manufacturing, and you could have real-time telecom services. Well, they would tell you that prioritization-wise, those real-time telecom services are probably top, and then you would have probably your manufacturing or supply chain. And then you'd have finance, which is very important, and then HR. So right there from that picture, you can see from the top down, you've kind of scratched the surface at the macro level. Now you have to take it down to the next level. Okay, in the communications part, the telecom part, what are the elements there that would drive criticalities? Another thing, starting from scratch, what do they even know about BCM? Can they objectively get their hands around what this really means? And of course, who will be your core contacts to get started? It doesn't help if they put you in a place with low-level people who don't know what BCM is and said, well, the VP 5 levels above me says we have to do BCDR. Well, you're new. They have no clue. You need to get to that senior level. Okay. Don't be scared. Okay. Starting from scratch, it can be daunting, but there are a variety of resources to help you on your way, starting with the DRI organization. Depending on the type of organization, if you do a search, There's tons of industry-specific research on BCM requirements. There's all kinds of papers. I mean, I did this myself. I tested it just so I was telling you the truth. And it's like, wow, you know, BCM for this and BCM for that, and supply chain and technology and then different certifications and what they're looking for. So there's a lot of information out there. And if you thought you were going into a company that was starting from scratch, it would be good to do that kind of research. Start with what the leaders want to achieve, what they want to support, and identify the subject matter experts. You know, just giving you a partner in that company and says, yeah, you know, Joe is really good at this stuff, and but he doesn't know all the aspects of the company things. Again, you need to start at that leaders level, and then for each of the things they've defined as critical, they need to have a SME, a subject matter expert, work with you. Think about how to craft universal policies and procedures. And again, wealth of information out there of what standards look like. DRI has their own version of things, so that's a good resource. Develop or purchase any tooling. You know, the days of doing things on spreadsheets and Word documents and things like that, that's just not supportable unless you're, you know, dealing with a small mom and pop shop. Any decent sized company is going to need some kind of tool to map your processes. Build your communication and program rollout plans, and above all, start small. Don't try to boil the ocean. Address the most common achievable goals and start there. If I were to go into some place brand new with my experience and background, the first thing I do is meet with the leaders. What is it you want to achieve? What are the major impacts here? Okay, I understand how your business works. The first thing I would start writing up is policies. What is the policy? And policy differs from procedures. Procedures is the how to achieve those standards and those how to achieve the policy. Policy says all technology services must recover in 1 hour or less. All services must have a DR plan. All services must identify sufficient technical support, whatever. Those are your policies. Well, then the how-to on that is in your standards and control procedures is, okay, every service will identify who their engineers and incident response people are. You know, that meets the policy standard. You'll have sufficient workforce. So I'm not going to go too far into that. Just don't try to boil the ocean. So summary, as BCM practitioners, you are the brain surgeons in the practice. You provide guidance to companies on the most effective ways to manage risk, because that's what this really comes down to, is risk. Always look for ways to consolidate, driving the best cost-effective methods for supporting BCM. Don't be hindered by the book. You are the book where you work, and one size doesn't fit all. Map what you need and don't get caught up in nice to have with no actions past nice to have. Oh, we should grab this data. We should grab that data. Are you going to do anything with that data? Well, not really, but it looks good. Yeah, that's cycles. That's resources, time you're wasting. And love your work. This is not everyone's day to day that you're working with. It's yours. So be the best advisor you can. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question for you,
Sure, Keith.
Robert. So, um, coming from Microsoft, you know, Patch Tuesdays is been a thing that has been around for 20 years.
Yep.
And when I schedule my operational resilience test with those critical applications, I often run into conflicts because the IT department needs to run these Patch Tuesdays, and then they got to run a cycle, and now it pushes off my operational resilience. So I understand two sides of the coin that they're both necessary, right? It's important that we test those critical applications, but it's also important that we push those patches so that the bad guys can't hack us, right?
Right.
Do you foresee in the future that Microsoft may change their approach to changing those Patch Tuesdays, which is like the second Tuesday of every month?
Have no idea.
Okay.
You're
I
asking Microsoft questions, and I have to be very protective of. If I answered that question, if
understood.
I had an answer, I don't have an answer. If
Yeah,
I had an answer, I couldn't tell you because I would be violating that I would be.
proprietary.
I'm not speaking for Microsoft. I'm speaking as a BCM practitioner. So I just wanted to make that clear. Not
Okay,
that I would not love to answer your question, but number one, I have no clue. And number two, I can't speak for Microsoft.
got it.
I can speak for BCM. I can't speak for Microsoft.
So what would you say if you had three takeaways for what's made you successful in business continuity throughout your career? What would you offer to some of these practitioners?
Learn the technology. Learn the technology that is supporting your business. It is very easy to learn business process. Okay. People, I do this and I sit here and, I staple that paper and everything. And I have a building I work with and I'm dependent on my laptop and things like that. That's easy. But understanding the technology that is driving that business is very important um, because technology can be a showstopper in a whole company. Okay. There are, if so for example, if Excel isn't working, okay, it's probably impacting your work. I'll work on a Word doc. I'll come back to Excel later. But if you're banking and your deposit system stops working, what I keep referring to as blast radius. The blast radius is huge. It means nobody can do this. It's all hands on deck, right? So you have to be very prepared for handling incidents. Versus something that says, well, I update HR stuff and it's not about payroll. It's not about people movement and promotions. It's other parts of HR. May not be those services may not be as thing. So really understanding the landscape, and I say technology over business process unless you are exclusively a business process business. Um, so a perfect example of that, you go work and it's business continuity on a law firm. Okay. Very important that those people have availability and everything. Generally, except for certain legal technology services, they're storing documents and things like that. But they need to have the offices. They need to be able to meet with people. They need to be able to respond and get themselves over to court. So people are highly, so it really depends. Caught me off guard.
No worries.
Uh, we talked about this one before, so I'm asking for a friend for the group. Say you come into that organization and they have a million plan and they sprawl it full out all these plans. How do you as the BC come in there and make that a very cohesive product that actually works for the organization? It's easy to manage because I know Microsoft has this massive organization and they don't have a million plans.
Yes. Okay. Two things. And I kind of had this in another presentation I had sent you for more advanced. Simplification and automatic response. And let me explain that. Simplification is if everybody does pretty much the same thing for an event, then you don't need 1,000 copies of everybody saying, and this is what I do, and this is what I do, and this is what I do. You have one master copy, and only the deltas have to be documented. So incident response, everybody uses the same incident response process, and this is how they're contacted. Great. That's your master plan. And the only thing that differs is the individual steps for recovering the service. And so that's technology. On the business process side, it's even easier. If 95% of your employees all work the same way in terms of business process remediation, it's one plan. Okay, so what do you do if the fire alarm goes off in a building? You evacuate and you go to a gathering zone, right? You don't need finance. What's your business continuity plan for that? The same as everybody else's. What's your business continuity plan if you can't work in the office? Well, we all have remote capabilities. Maybe some people don't, and that's your delta, but 95% of your employees do. So consolidation of processes, being able to look at that and go, oh my God, they have 1,000 plans. Do they need 1,000 plans? So that's number one. The second part of your question, and this is the cool piece, is whatever you do should be automatic. If you have to go to a binder to do normal BCDR, and I'm going to qualify that in a minute, then it's too complex. Okay. It should be second nature. It should be things that you just kind of do. Now, does that apply to everything? No, because if you have oddball events, people are not going to have them off the top of their head. So let's use the example. Fire alarm goes off in your building. It's very automatic to say, oh, we do these drills twice a year. I know what to do. If I hear that alarm, I'm supposed to go outside. Boom. That's easy. I don't need to go to a binder to say, hey, I heard an alarm. What should I do? Right? It's automatic. But let's say the event is we were moving in, a little barrel of toner and it spilled over. Well, you may evacuate. That's that piece. But you're not going to know off the top of your head what's the telephone number for OSHA or hazard company that works nearby that's going to come do the cleanup. Okay, that's not something you do every day. That's not something that's automatic. Yeah, then you should have that in the binder. Who are your contacts? But you shouldn't have to tell people that says, well, look in the binder because for this it says dial 911. That should be automatic. Somebody falls over, clutches their chest, it's 911, right? It's not, let me get the binder. Oh, okay, it's chest pains. Yeah, definitely 911. So I'm being extreme, but I think you understand what I'm saying in terms of simplification. So Microsoft incident response. Every one of our services uses the same incident response process. We have tooling, we have contacts. So because whether it's a high impact event or low, hey, somebody's having a problem with this, everybody uses the same process every day. So nobody has to go to a binder. Do I have to document it? Oh, heck yeah, because for certifications and audits, they need to know end to end what's your process and can you show proof of that process. So that's my job, is to say, well, we have something and here's how it works, and I can prove to you that's how it works. But nobody in incident response goes to an incident response manual and says, how do I do this? Did that answer your question? And is that valuable to the group? Simplification. That should be in the back of your mind in every aspect of this role is, yes, you can come up with 1,000 risks, but do they net to the same thing? And I'm going to give you an example of that personally from Microsoft. And we advertise, this is not, I'm not speaking for Microsoft. I'm talking about simplification. Some auditors will say, have you addressed loss of a data center from fire? Have you addressed loss of a data center from flood? Have you addressed loss of a data center from network? Have you addressed loss of a data center from tsunami and blah, 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 blah. And they can come up with 20 different scenarios. What's wrong with that picture? I'm not going to map all those scenarios. I'm going to have one, loss of a data center. I don't care what the root cause was. I care that the impact defined was loss of a data center for whatever reason, and here's my mitigation. Okay, because none of those impacts change the net result of DR, right? Doesn't matter. Was it a meteor? Okay, we're going to do the meteor scenario. Or was it the tsunami? Oh, we're going to do the tsunami scenario. It's the same thing. So this is where I say, don't be hindered by the book. You are the book. And if you're in that situation with auditors and things like that, no. We've consolidated. We have one risk. Now, there are other instances where you're going to document multiple risks where they're applicable. I'm not saying everything has to go down to one risk. What I'm saying is always be cognizant of minimizing resource cycles. And another thing, when you minimize resource cycles, you get better buy-in from people that you work with because, oh, this is easy. Oh, that's what I have to fill out, or that's what I have to do. Yeah, I can do that. When you overcomplicate things, it becomes a tax, and nobody likes being taxed. Come on, more questions. Who's starting a new, raise your hand if you're starting a brand new role soon. Oh, you're all working.
You call somebody out. Let's call out Steve.
Steve?
Steve Massey.
What was the question? No.
Yeah, no, I was listening. I'm just trying to get my computer to work. Hey, so I'm doing the internship right now with Netflix. So I'm coming from a medical background, and
Okay.
And so I found out after taking the DRI, the business continuity course, that I've been doing the risk assessments and everything, just different verbiage and different things. Obviously, I don't do the DR stuff, so the guy's been hooked it up, and I'm doing an AWS course right now just so I can understand how cloud computing works and
Right.
everything. Yeah, so eventually I will be, I'm retiring in May, and I'll be jumping from the medical field into the VC world. Already putting out, job applications as fast as I can. Daniel's my mentor. He was a maestro on my resume, because like most military folks, 20 years of yes sir, no sir, I'm gonna put the right camis on and be there. I knew when to be there and how to do things. I don't know how to write a resume, and I just, this year I found out what a cover letter was. There's all these transitional things.
Hey, I've been in corporate world for over 40 years, and I still am not good at resume writing.
Yeah. So that's me in a nutshell. Just transitioning, obviously from one field to another, and I wrote down a lot of notes of what you said, and it made sense. And the thing that resonated with me the most, coming in green as a green stick, is simplify everything. Like when in the Navy, we call it don't nuke it, and simplifying is the best thing. Keep it simple. Right. And I've learned that working with the guys here at Netflix. They're like, dude, there's nothing you're gonna do that's gonna kill anybody or launch a nuclear rocket, so don't worry about it.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that was loaded.
Yeah, my bad.
First, Steve, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. I gather most of you are in service or veterans. So let me first thank all of you for that. High, Daniel will tell you, high respect for our service members. And this is a great transition into the corporate world for you, because in many ways, your brains have been adapted to thinking about risk, whatever it may be. And that's really where the core comes in. So advice to somebody brand new, like you going to Netflix or whatever, even though you're in the medical background, is listen much, talk little. Absorb the data, but ask questions. Be the person that asks a million questions and then listen to the answers. It's my role has a certain flavor to it in Microsoft, but my thirst for knowledge has made me really good at understanding the interplay of the services we have and how they operate and how they deploy and all of those factors, so that it really the pieces come together. So listen a lot and listen to what, people have to say. And I just gave you some lenses there of simplify. If somebody were to come to you in Netflix and go, oh yeah, every one of these teams has a DR plan. And you start looking at the DR plans and you say, well, they filled out a template. Well, that's a step in a direction right there. But the thing is, what do all of the contents of those templates look? Immediately in your mind, you're like, why do you have to have all separate plans? Why can't you have a master plan that they all refer to and say, well, here's a delta. These people in Netflix can only work on site, or these people in Netflix have to have specialized access. So there's the delta. Everything else they do is the 95% plan, but here's the 5% that they do differently. You have saved, and now you can advertise that to the people you're reporting to as, hey man, I just made your job easier. I'm fulfilling my role as a practitioner by looking at what you're doing and saying, you could do this easier. And now if you had to be certified on an annual basis, you've got one major document to support versus 100. Did they keep it up to, we were doing good, but this one, it says it hasn't been updated in 2 years. Why have 100 people update 100 things that all say the same thing? You got one master document, you update it once a year, you put your history in it, updated January 2024, everybody's covered.
We have one question from William, or at least he had a hand up.
William. You're on mute, William.
Hey, sir, this is Will. Just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be in the group and in your block of instruction. It's great, and your experience that you're sharing. So with me right now, I did attend the DRI course, became certified. Dan was also one of my mentors. I'm now under Keith, under the program.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've had my one-on-one discussion with Keith yesterday prior to this meeting. But yeah, I landed a job as a contractor. Now I'm working at DRI for the U.S. Southern Command. But my question for you was the consultation. Ever since I was on LinkedIn, I started to get hit up a lot about consultation. I've never done that, never even, don't even understand how we can go about that. But for example, I had someone hit me up on LinkedIn saying, hey, for 3 days, we'll compensate you if you can come out to Virginia and do a consultation. Can you share a little bit about experience with something like that? And also, I did understand what you were talking about compliance, because right now, since I'm in the IT world, one thing I'm trying to figure out is the Trade Agreement Act.
Oh, great.
However, with that, since I'm a contractor and I'm working for Govies, a government agency,
yeah,
I was told I can't even mess with that. That's separate to a whole different branch. So I was kind of
let their lawyers kind of figure that out. What I basically do is, for some of that stuff is I let legal or whatever, basically in many cases, I'm a receiver of controls. And it's okay, are we already meeting those controls? How are we doing it? How do I document it? As far as the back and forth of, etc., I try to stay away from it as much as possible, although I'm very heavily involved with government certifications, Treasury Department, you name it. And it's like, we have people, I'm not the decision maker. I'm the recipient of the decisions. So while I may agree with, oh, wow, that's a risk, or, we need to address this, it's really, again, my leaders who make the decision. Yes, we will support this. Once they've agreed they will support it, I come up with the process of how we capture it. Other people are the doers, but I'm gonna come up with how we capture it, or fixing the language so it's understandable from the 72-page government document down to the 3-page, how we support it in our program. So William, the consulting bit, is it they want you to consult for 3 days, or they want to train you for 3 days?
So sir, one of the first ones I got was that I was being asked to be a cybersecurity consultant. So they were asking me if I would come up and meet with one of their clients and talk about cybersecurity. And then the offer was, we will compensate you for your consultation and pay for your travel. But I've never done anything like that. I was a little nervous to get into something like that. So I was just asking your experience on that.
Are you a cybersecurity expert?
I work in the IT field. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I have the experience and on hands through the military, offensive and defensive as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it unless I could unless I could really identify myself as an expert in that field. Because what they're looking for is somebody to talk about what's going on in the world, what are the things they should be aware of and warning, giving them a direction. If you were a cybersecurity expert, like, we're in the military, that was your role, specifically protecting the military against cyber threats and putting processes in, then I'd say, yeah, go do it and charge them big time. Did that help?
Absolutely, it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Like if it wasn't a conflict for me, if somebody said, Robert, we want you to go to this, and I do these things, but on behalf of Microsoft, I want you to go to this customer and tell them all about DR and things they should talk about, and we'll compensate Microsoft for your time and everything like that, I would do it. And while I know about cybersecurity and I know about other aspects, privacy, data residency and things like that, I am not an expert in those things, so I would not do it. So, okay. Looks like we're out of time. I want to thank Daniel and Keith for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm glad to see people interested in transitioning from the military to the commercial world, even if it's government commercial world, as I call it. And this is a great practice. It really is. And it can lead to a lot of things. Just because you start as a practitioner doesn't mean you won't wind up. You couldn't have a career saying, well, I'm eventually going to be, a general manager level or a VP level of risk in a company. It opens the door for you in a very, very broad practice. And I'm happy to do this anytime Daniel and Keith invite me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, folks.
There was a lot of thank yous in the chat to you as well.
I see that.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time and your expertise coming on here. And I wanted to share with everyone one last thing. Robert is here because we reached out to him. So I reached out to Robert a while ago, just out of the blue, and said, "Hey, I'm a BC. I've been doing it for a while, but now I'm retiring from the military. I'm looking to get into some civilian stuff, and I need some mentorship." In the BC community, it's very welcoming, and you're not going to get a slap in the face when you do that. So you can meet people like Robert that are high level, that are willing to share their experience and happy to do so. So I encourage you to follow that same suit and bring in some Robert Arcos to your fold. But thank you again for your time and for all the population here. Thank you for coming out to listen to Robert speak as well.
Thank you all. I much appreciate it. And again, thank you for your service.
Thanks, everyone.